everyone out there, and welcome to today's Search Engine Journal webinar. Hope you're having a great day wherever you are, and we're thrilled to have you here with us. I am joined by Vishal Maru, and behind the scenes right now, we have Shabik Ray, both of iQuanti, and Shabik's going to join us for the Q&A portion. But today, Vishal is really going to talk to us about how to harness first-party data and win in a cookieless future. We've all been hearing about the impact of Google doing away with cookies, but really, the data is already yours, and you should have a control of it and be using it in a way that's beneficial. So Vishal's going to talk with us about ways to embrace the power of first-party data to better connect with your customers and your prospects. My name is Heather Campbell, and I'll be your moderator today. Vishal, thank you for being here with us. Before we get into the housekeeping, can you tell us a little bit about you and iQuanti?
Sure. Very nice to be here, everyone. So I'm Vishal Maru. I'm a VP of Digital Solutions at iQuanti, and I focus on developing and implementing strategies and solutions, cross-channel solutions, specifically for the financial services and insurance vertical. Although my wife likes to think that I just get paid for making PowerPoint decks. Before iQuanti, I was working at Discover Financial Services, for 5 years. I've been in this industry for 13 plus years and led acquisition efforts at different financial firms. So with that, Heather, back to you.
Awesome. All right. So just real quick housekeeping tips, and then we'll get into it. So if you experience any technical difficulties, please use the chat box to let us know. And there are separate tabs for the questions in the chat. So just take a second to get familiar with those functions that up in the top right of your screen. We'll also have a poll. And if it doesn't slide out for you, it'll be located in that polls tab. Questions, you can upvote questions. If somebody asks a question that's similar to yours or something you really want to know about, use that thumbs up. That'll let us know it's important to you all out there today. And so, questions, the Q&A section we'll get to at the end, and we'll try to answer as many as we can at the end of the presentation. There's also closed captioning that's up in the top right corner of your screen as well, and you just click that little CC button. And so we'll do our best to link to any resources or tools in the chat, but if we miss one, just use the chat to ask about that. And then resources will also be included in your recap email that you will get after this presentation today. And so we do ask that you stick around for just a short survey. It takes 3 minutes or less, and that really helps us gauge what works and how we can make SEJ webinars more useful for you. And lastly, you will receive this full recording of this session later today, so watch your inbox for that. And with that, that's enough from me. So Vishal, it's all yours.
Thanks, Heather. Can you guys see the table of contents slide?
Yep, looks good on our end.
Cool. So today we'll be covering a few different things, part of this topic. So we'll briefly talk on the evolving privacy landscape. I know all of you are well aware of majority of the things happening, so we'll just quickly recap some of the key items over here. There are a lot of different solutions in the works right now across the industry. We talk about why first-party data. Then majority of the time today will focus on how to effectively leverage your first-party data. And then finally, we'll quickly talk about how can you build a roadmap for your firm for implementation. Right? So let's talk about the evolving privacy landscape. Right? So when it comes to the privacy landscape, there's a few different things that are happening. Right? The first one, customers are getting more and more concerned about their privacy. And there's a lot of different regulations, GDPR, CCPA, which are all triggered by some privacy flaws that have happened in the past. For instance, Cambridge Analytica, right? And then we have privacy changes that are coming from in the top tech players, right? Google deprecating the third-party cookies, and Apple announcing the ATT feature, right? So while all of these things are having big impacts in the industry, it's the third one, right? The changes from the Googles and Apples, which are having a dramatic impact on the ecosystem overall, right? So in terms of impact of third-party cookie deprecation, so what we know is out of the top 1,000 websites, 85% of those sites have cookies set by a third party, right? So we can imagine the magnitude of this, and the impact is going to be huge, right? And overall, we're estimating a revenue loss of around $10 billion for publishers, right? So this is going to go into effect, next year. So we should start seeing, this impact happen then, right? Um, in terms of Apple's ATT feature, which is the app tracking transparency feature, we know 63% of the customers will actively opt out and not to be tracked, right? So what this means is revenue losses for a lot of players like Facebook who rely on this data. So Facebook is already estimating a revenue loss of again around $10 billion in 2022 alone. Right? So these are big impacts, right? But what this means, for advertisers. So for advertisers, the biggest impact is going to be in terms of targeting, right? So in terms of third-party cookies and ATT will limit the targeting capabilities of different platforms. Although the impact across different channels or platforms is going to be different. For instance, paid search, the impact is going to be small, right? Because again, it's more keyword driven, and the audiences are within Google's walled garden, which is more reliant on profile data than cookies. When it comes to social media, the likes of Facebook, there will be medium impact because Facebook again is a walled garden. It has a lot of information, about its customers, so it can still leverage that. But the ATT feature limits, information outside of that. And finally, the biggest impact area is going to be programmatic, right? So it's in the programmatic space where different vendors, different players rely on third-party cookies to stitch identities, to build profiles, build segments. So that's going to be ineffective. The other area where we'll see challenges is with measurement and attribution. Again, third-party cookies are leveraged to stitch journeys across platforms, channels, devices, and with third-party cookies deprecating, multi-touch attribution models are going to be less reliable. There will be other impacts as well, right? There will be challenges with the tracking reach and frequency, and fraud detection is also going to get a little more difficult. So with all of this, what we anticipate is lower campaign efficiencies, lower advertising revenues, and the scale is also going to be limited. Right? So what is happening, to solve for this, right? There's a lot of different, solutions in the market right now that are trying to solve for this. But at this point, we feel first-party data is the only certain solution in an evolving landscape. Right? So in terms of the industry solutions, right? We have a few industry solutions, right? So Google Privacy Sandbox. This is a solution by Google. It's a set of initiatives that set of proposals that Google is leading to help solve for different challenges that advertisers will face with the deprecation of cookies, right? So when it comes to targeting, measurement, you must have heard of Flock, right? There's Trade Desk coming up with Unified ID, which is going to be an alternate of cookie using hashed email addresses, and there's other proprietary ID resolution solutions in the works as well. But all of these solutions are still in the works, right? So we don't know whether they will work, how effective they will be, whether they'll be accepted, right? So there's still a lot of uncertainty around that. So at this point, what marketers can do is really focus on first-party data, right? And why first-party data? Primarily because it's accurate, right? It's information from your own customers. It's relevant. The information will be relevant, for your business. It's readily available to you, and it's cost-effective, right? So it's imperative, to marketers, for marketers to right now really focus on building the first-party data infrastructure and making sure you're able to harness the first-party data in the cookieless future. Right? So let's take a quick poll, over here, right? So what percentage, of your first party data are you leveraging in your digital marketing campaigns, right? Let's just quickly take, 30 seconds to answer this, and would be good to see the results before we dive into the recommendations.
So they've just started coming in, but again, if that doesn't pop up for anybody, you can find that under the polls tab. So far, Vishal, the answer at more than 50% are saying that they're actually at that less than 20% that are
Oh, wow.
leveraging the first party data.
Yeah. So yeah, so that's that's a huge opportunity for everyone, right? So this topic, hopefully, the recommendations will be very relevant, for you over here. So yeah, so before we get into the recommendations, let's quickly talk about the different first party, second party, third party, zero party data. And I'm sure like you guys have heard these terms before, very familiar, but I'll quickly go through this. So first party data, it's the data about your customers that you own, right? Second party data is data acquired from a trusted partner. So it is first party data for someone else, but it's a partnership that you formed with that entity, right? Then you have third party data. Third party data, it's a lot of different third party data vendors, large and small, and they collect aggregate data through different ways. And oftentimes we don't see great quality over here, right? Whereas when it comes to first party and second party data, because it's your own data or from a trusted partner, the quality is usually good, right? And then, off late, we've been hearing this term around zero party data, right? For all practical purposes, party data and first party data is pretty much the same. However, some firms, have been categorizing them slightly differently. They're saying like zero party data is, the data that customers intentionally and proactively share, about their preferences, about their purchase intentions. Whereas, first party data is what, companies, collect based on customer interactions with the website, right? So it's the mode of collection, active versus passive. But for our discussion, for all practical purposes, you can consider first party and zero party data pretty much the same, right? Um, Moving on, right? So, in order to build a strong first party data strategy, what do you need to have in place, right? So, the first and most important thing is you need to really build a robust first party data and MarTech infrastructure. Once you have this foundation in place, you can leverage the first party data for digital activation, and then for measurement and attribution, right? For today's discussion, we'll be focusing on the digital activation side of things. Um, all of three are big topics. We won't be able to cover everything in one webinar. The third one we've already covered in a previous webinar. So today we'll focus on the digital activation side of first party data. So moving into that, right, the first step, right, is segmentation. Um, so, we have these typical segments that we leverage in digital marketing campaigns, right? You have the cross-sell segments, you have similar audience, lookalike audiences, you have the remarketing segments, and then you have the negative targeting segments. But we typically see there's different challenges in which organizations leverage these different audience segments, and they're not effectively utilized, right? So when it comes to cross sell, we often see organizations upload their entire customer list, right? They're not segmented in any way. There's no prioritization or personalization of product offer or messages. And same thing with similar audiences. Either it's the entire customer list or all online conversions happen. They're part of like just one list, and similar audiences are built off of that. Remarketing is often very simplistic. Either you upload the entire remarketing, the entire website visitors, or it is segmented at a very basic level, like based on product pages or content pages, right? And then finally, with the negative targeting, it's still not effectively utilized. For instance, in paid search, we still see a lot of firms spending on customers which would have login intent or customers who already converted recently, right? So there is a lot of inefficiency with that as well. So how do we solve for this, right? So we really need to focus on better segmentation, which results in better personalization and spend prioritization, right? Which will result in overall marketing effectiveness. So let's see that with an example. So this is an example of a bank, right? And this is deposits customer. So we trying to segment their deposits customer base. So what we're doing is we segmenting it based on profitability and then underlying behavior, right? So what we see, on the top, we have the highest profitability customers. These are high value customers which have multiple deposit relationships. Then you have medium profitability customers. But what we want to understand is not all medium profitability customers might be the same, right? Within the medium profitability customers, there will be customers who have high potential. They're just not using the account as a secondary account, and there would be mass market customers, right, who are using it as a primary bank account, but they're probably not going to drive more balances. And there would be other segments which are unprofitable. For instance, gamers, right? So gamers would be individuals who open a bank account just to get that initial offer of cashback, and once they earn the cashback, they close the account, right? So now for marketers, they can do different things with these different segments, right? um, so for instance, they can do lookalike modeling for segment number one, and they know that okay, these are high profitability, so really have high priority. Versus number three can also be leveraged for lookalike modeling, but these are going to be medium priority because they're going to be less profitable. But we know these are bread and butter accounts because that's where the scale is, right? And then for segments like gamers, right, we need to negatively target them across all banking products, as well as we really need to identify okay, which are the channels and tactics which are driving these sort of gamers, right? So segmenting the customers can give a lot of different insights about the behavior and help you build customized strategy which will help marketing effectiveness, right? Then also really focusing on moving to the next level and leveraging advanced analytics and ML for building audience segments, right? So we'll take an example of retargeting, right? So when it comes to retargeting, you might be building some segments based on pages visited or sections visited, right? But the way users interact with your website can give a lot of insight about their intent, about their need, about their potential value. And a lot of these different micro interactions that they make on your website can provide those sort of insights. But you're not leveraging any of those micro interactions, right? If they use a certain widget, if they looked at the FAQs, if they clicked on some of the product terms, right? A lot of those micro interactions will tell you a lot about the customers, but that's not being leveraged. So what you can do is you can use platforms like GA4 and combine it with your first party data to capture all of those interactions, and then use ML tools like cloud machine learning to build that intelligence, which can be activated across these different platforms, right? So the ML and the AI engines are doing the work of figuring out what sort of a message, offer, and spend needs to go for what sort of audiences, right? So you're transitioning from a pure like rules based approach to an AI and machine learning based approach, right? Um, then moving to the next bit, right, which is actively building your first party data. So now it is very important that you start gathering more information. What we often see is a lot of these brands, they run a lot of upper funnel campaigns, right? And they get a lot of users to come to the website, and these websites and these users are not going to convert because these are upper funnel campaigns, right? So the intent is not there, right? But brands are failing to capture any sort of information at that point to effectively market to them down the funnel, right? So what you need to do is at every stage you need to really focus on okay, what information can you gather about the customer from every engagement, every interaction, every touch point, that can help you know more about the user and help downstream marketing, right? And there's different ways in which you can do that, and different industries might have different tactics, right? So when it comes to e-commerce, right, like deals and offers to capture the customer information might be useful. You can also get them to download your app in exchange, for some monetary value, right? Product finder tools are very helpful. So this is example of one of the banks wherein it provides a product finder tool for credit cards. So over here, the customer can choose what sort of credit card they're interested in, what the credit profile is, right? And this will be very valuable information, for the bank, which will help them, prioritize and do downstream marketing and customization of messaging, for them, right? Um, you could ask for customers, preferences, what they like, to provide personalized, recommendations, and then provide really valuable content, to the customers in exchange, for their information. And this is a tactic that is often utilized by B2B firms, right? So this is how you can capture and build on your first party data. But it's important that you're not just building the data, but also you are building custom segments that can be leveraged downstream for personalization and prioritization, right? So moving to the next tactic, which is optimizing for profitability, right? So what we often see is, when it comes to digital marketing, these a lot of the firms are optimizing for online conversions, right? Which do not often align with the business KPIs. So how do we transition from just optimizing for pure conversions to actually optimizing for business KPIs, right? So this is an example of a paid search campaign. So you have the paid search campaign which drives online conversions, and your paid search campaigns, most of them are optimized for this particular event, right? So it could either be leads or app approval. For retail, it will be purchase, average order value, and such, right? But there are a lot of events that happen downstream which are more closely tied to the business KPIs, right? So in many cases there would be offline conversions, right? For B2B, the leads are translating into sales, or in terms of retail, there might be returns, right? And then there will be finally revenue, right? And the revenue will be over time, right? So it could be revenue, lifetime value, repeat purchases, right? And what we see is these events, right, are often lagging. Offline conversions could lag by a few weeks. Revenue LTV could lag by a few months or even more, right? um, and we know, like, any event that is more than 2 weeks old from the online conversion, that cannot be used for optimizing the campaigns in paid search, right? So how do we really start optimizing paid search campaigns for some of those business KPIs, right? So that's where predictive analytics comes into play, right? So with predictive analytics, how do you leverage the information that you have at the time of online conversion to really understand the customer value at a later stage, right? So what are the kind of attributes that can be leveraged for building these predictive analytics models, right? So what we've seen, some of the kinds of attributes that work, right? So one is different sort of profile attributes, right? So it could be demographics, it could be income, assets, home value. For B2B, it could be company size. If they're existing customer, their CRM data can be leveraged, right? There could be product attributes, right? What sort of product they are going for, what is the category, again, things like loan amount, right? And then a lot of these environmental attributes, right? Like browser, device, day of week, time of day, and also different campaign themes, keywords, and such, right? So what we have seen is these attributes are typically strong indicators of downstream revenue or profitability. So you really need to leverage your data analytics or data sciences team to run such predictive and analytics models to help you build these different sort of value scores, right? So at iQuanti, we have this value and intent scoring engine, which we call WISE. So it scores users on value as well as propensity based on different interactions that they do on the website, as well as the information they fill out in the application, right? So moving on to the next tactic, right? So over here we really focus on creating partnerships to leverage second party data, right? So second party data would be someone else's first party data, right? So how can you leverage that more effectively? So with everything that's happening in the industry, right? Publishers revenue is at stake, right? So publishers are really focusing on building on their first party data because this is going to help them with their revenues in the cookieless world, right? So the publishers are implementing paywalls, registration walls, cookie walls, so that they can capture information about the user. Majority of the big publishers already had this in place, but now everyone else is also really trying to build this up. So you might have also experienced, as you browsing the web, looking at different content websites, you must have seen more and more of these walls pop up as you're trying to access content, right? So now with this happening, you know earlier or currently, the the programmatic space is fairly centralized, right? Where you have DSP, you can leverage a DSP to access inventory all across the web, right? Now with cookieless, what we anticipate is that the internet, the programmatic space, or display space might get more fragmented, right? You will have a lot of these large media houses, walled gardens, which will have their own first party data universes, and you will access advertising inventory and target specific segments through those, right? So what you need to focus on, you need to really explore these different walled gardens, large publishers, which would have first party database segments which are relevant to your industry, to your product, right? So over here I'm giving an example of Forbes, right? So Forbes.com has several offerings for advertisers, right? And it has a lot of these different key segments, right? So it has segments like women under 30s, business and tech decision makers, a lot of C-suite executives, high net worth investors, right? And it has a lot of different solutions. So one of the solutions it has is brand voice, which is where brands can reach out to their specific niche target audiences through strong editorial content and storytelling, right? So we know Capital One is advertising on Forbes.com, and a few other players, right? And Forbes.com is just one example. There are a lot of other publishers across a lot of other industry segments which have very niche and specific audiences, right? The other space is retail media advertising, right? And this is going to be the highest growth ad segment in 2022, right? So with the retail media advertising, it's expected to jump by 31% in 2022 to $41 billion, right? So retail media advertising is pretty much advertising on places like Amazon, right? And as we know, like Amazon really dominates the space, right? It has 78% of the US digital media retail spend. But companies like Walmart and Instacart are also emerging in this space. And then we have a few new entrants as well. You have the likes of Albertsons, Dollar Tree, Lowe's, right? So these are all the different players that you need to start exploring if you're a retail or an e-commerce company, right? And a lot of these retail media networks have very strong first party data, right? Because they have information about the customers purchases, right? Which is going to be very, very relevant for retail and e-commerce brands. um, and then finally, we have personalization, right? So you have your own website, which is your own media, right? So you need to make sure that you are maximizing the potential of your own media, right? And you can do that through personalization. You can provide personalized products, offers, messaging to your existing customers, as well as users who come into the website, right? Based on their past interactions or whatever you know about them, right? And there's different approaches to personalization. You can figure out what approach makes sense for you based on your maturity and your scale, right? So you have the simple rules based personalization, right? So you can use your website analytics platform, and maybe like some high level CRM data, whether they're an existing customer or not, right? And provide some personalization based on the interactions that they've done with your website, or what sort of products that they own, right? Or you can really focus on AI and ML led personalization, right? So we have these different decision engines or personalization engines in the market that really leverage AI and ML, right? So what happens is they are connected to a lot of different data sources, right? To website analytics data, to your CRM data. If you have any marketing lists that you use for offline marketing, that can be fed into that. If there are any sort of eligibility lists that you might have, if you have any other marketing campaign data, you might also be leveraging any other third party data. So there would be hundreds and hundreds of attributes that you might have about your customers. So all of those attributes can be fed into the decision engine, right? And then you can provide all the different variations of products and offers and messaging. And then the decision engine will learn on its own around, okay, what product, what messaging, what offer makes the most sense to which user, right? So this approach makes sense for firms which have higher maturity and have much larger scale, right? But if you're not doing personalization at all, we would recommend at least get started with the basic rules based personalization, and over time you can build the infrastructure that will be needed for machine learning driven personalization, right? um, and then moving to, and yeah, so and we've seen that personalization can have a huge impact on ROI, right? And this is an example, right? Like when you look at like any of the major e-commerce companies like Amazon, right? You will see like majority of the pages are personalized, right? But that's the case within a lot of other industries as well, especially financial services. If you look at some of the major players in this space, you will see a lot of the sections are personalized. So if you next time you're logging on to your bank, right, you might want to look at the homepage, and then you will see, okay, the products that they have on there might be aligned with what you are looking for or what you might have explored in the past, right? And that is driven by personalization. And from our experience, what we have seen is a lot of these large banks are using large decision engines which are leveraging AI and ML for delivering this personalization. And then the last bit is really focusing on gathering consent. So what happens is when it comes to marketing and privacy, right? uh, like with the growing challenges with privacy and consent and with cookies, we are often thinking about the impact on marketing effectiveness, and we're trying to figure out a way around uh, that to figure out how to get maximum marketing efficiency, right? But what we need to do is we really need to understand where this is coming from, right? So this is coming from customers being concerned about privacy, and they want to want firms to respect that privacy, right? So as marketers, we need to find that balance between providing that respect and driving for marketing effectiveness, right? So what we can do is can provide really clear privacy policy, right? Oftentimes we see that it's just very plain bland message, it's like accept all cookies or not, right? But we can provide a very clear privacy policy. The customer understands what they are consenting to, what are the different things that you're tracking, right? And really respecting when they're trying to opt out, not discouraging that, and only collecting the data that you need from the customers, right? And we see like some good examples of privacy policies out there, where they're making the privacy policies very very user friendly, right? And giving the users to select, right? And this is the way you can gather trust from the user and build deeper relationships with the user. So moving on, right? So these are the different tactics around leveraging first party data, right? Uh, but so you have access to all this data, right? Most firms have access to their own first-party data, but they still struggle to have a first-party data strategy, right? In the poll earlier, we saw less than 20%, less than 50% were using, or 50% of the individuals are using less than 20% of the first-party data, right? Um, so there are different organizational challenges that we see when it comes to having an effective, first-party data strategy, right? Um, so what are some of those challenges, right? So one thing that we see is there are often organizational and data silos. There are lack of in-house capabilities, and then there is lack of effective activation strategy, right? So when it comes to data silos, we see like oftentimes online offline data disconnected. If you have multiple products, multiple business units, those data points are disconnected. The marketing teams, the data analytics team, the data infrastructure teams are working in silos, right? Which results in lack of an overall first party data strategy, right? And there are lack of in-house capabilities or also concerns of bandwidth, especially with areas like advanced analytics and data sciences, which become more and more important to leverage the first party data effectively, right? And also the martech is evolving really fast, right? So there's different players like cdps, id resolution, google analytics for data clean rooms, right? And you may not have the in-house capabilities for these platforms, right? And then we also see there is lack of an effective full funnel activation strategy, right? We often see like brand team and acquisition teams are disconnected. There will be different channel teams who are working in silos, in not utilizing all of that first party data effectively in all the digital channels. You're not optimizing performance towards the business KPIs, right? So these are the different challenges that we see with effectively leveraging the first party data, right? So what can we do to overcome these challenges and really build a roadmap for implementation, right? um, so what you need to do is really focused on building a first party data strategy, right? And for that you will have to break the different organizational silos, different data silos. You will really have to come together, marketing teams, data sciences, data analytics, data infrastructure teams, to really build first party data strategy, right? So it includes like identifying all the different data sources, all the different data attributes. Oftentimes the data is not clean, so really cleaning the data, mapping out these different data sources across the customer journey, identifying opportunities for building the data, and figuring out how to effectively use the data across different platforms, right? Once you have some data strategy, you will identify, what is needed to implement this strategy, right? And that might involve investing in, building robust infrastructure, right? Whether it is CDPs, CMPs, ID resolution, personalization platforms, Google marketing platform, right? So really figuring out like, what investments that you need to make to bring your first party data to life, right? And the important thing is going to be building a connected infrastructure, making sure your online offline data is connected, your offline conversions are flowing back into the online platforms and providing that feedback. There's a single unified view of the customer, right? So all of those things need to be in place. And then figuring out like where you want to build in-house capabilities and where you want to augment resources, right? So in terms of data sciences, advanced analytics, right? Do you have the in-house capabilities? Do you need to hire people, build the skills on that, as well as from the platform side, right? With a lot of these new platforms like the cdps, and then you have the personalization engines, right? um, so you might not have in-house capabilities. So how do you augment resources to complement your existing teams and help build those capabilities in-house, right? And finally, effectively activating the first party data, right? So this comes to like all of those different tactics that we discussed, right? Segmenting different customers, prioritization, personalization, having a full funnel approach, leveraging AI ML for advanced audience strategies, right? So this is how you can, really overcome all the challenges and build a strong roadmap for first party data. Um, so yeah, so that's with the different tactics and recommendations that we had, right? So one thing that I wanted to touch on is from an I-quality perspective, we can really help organizations with their first party data. So we can do a first party data audit, right? So what we do is we help organizations maximize the potential of their first party data, and the way we do it is we map all your first party data availability from different sources, different attributes, right? Understand how you're utilizing these different sources. We map the data flow across all sources, evaluate your martech data infrastructure platforms. We evaluate your different audience activation tactics across all digital channels, right? And then in terms of delivery, what you get is you get recommendations on the overall utilization of first party data. You get recommendations on infrastructure, on different technology vendors for the different use cases. Recommendations on different activation tactics that you can leverage to maximize the use of first party data in different digital channels, right? So that's like a comprehensive assessment that we can do. um, we are also offering like a quick self assessment, right? So the link will be provided to you. The link will be part of this deck. So it's like a very quick 12 question sort of self assessment, which covers like a few different areas. It should take no longer than 5 to 7 minutes of your time. So if you have the time, fill it out. And what we will do is we will build a customized report for you, and we'll benchmark it against this peer set, which fills out that report. And then we can provide you with some high level gaps and opportunities, and then we can send it to you across in a couple of business days, right? Um, so yeah, so that's with the tactics and recommendations that we had. So we'll open it up to Q&A now, Heather.
Perfect. That's good stuff, Vishal. Thank you. All right. So let's see. Is Sabi gonna fit? Yeah, there we go. All right. So we got the entire gang here with us. So let's get to some of these. All right. So first, is it essential to leverage a CDP, which stands for Customer Data Platform, for utilizing first party audiences effectively?
Cool. Shabik, you want to take that?
Yeah, sure. So CDP is one of the platform that that enables optimal utilization of first-party data. Having said that, it is not a mandatory thing to implement a CDP. So depending on the number of touch points that you have for gathering first-party data, the amount of spend that you're doing on paid media, the number of activation channels you have, you may consider a CDP, but it is not an essential platform to get started with utilizing your first-party data.
Okay. So Dan is asking, Dan says, I'm new to data analytics, and how is first party data more useful than third party data?
Yeah. So first party data, it's a lot more useful than third party data, right? Like, with first party data, this is data about your own customers, right? So it's accurate. You can rely on that, right? It is available to you. It is cost effective. It's relevant, right? The one challenge that you have with first party data is scale, right? So third party data is what allows you with scale, but the downside of third party data is that you don't know how the data is being aggregated, so the quality of the data is often questionable, and with the cookies going away, the third party data collection is going to be more and more challenging for different ad tech players who do that. So the quality of the data is going to depreciate further, right? So first party data is going to be like one of the most important tools that you have as a marketer at your disposal in the post cookie world.
Great. So another question that we have from Prakriti, how much cost will be involved in acquiring first party data is compared to second or third party data in terms of money, time, and effort. So I know that's tough, right? Because it all depends on how large their data set is or any of that. But so maybe we can't give a ballpark on cost, but how would they maybe go about maybe estimating that?
So I mean, in terms of cost, like first party data is available to you, right? Like it's the information that the customers are providing to you, and in addition to that, you can implement additional tactics to gather additional information. But there is no direct cost. There is no media cost involved to collect the first party data, right? Because it's your own customer, right? Second party data, there's a lot of different ways in which you can leverage second party data, right? It could be publisher partnerships, right? So we talked about like retail media. We talked about different publishers like Forbes.com. So they have a lot of these different solutions, right? So then second party data can be leveraged through those platforms, and there's a few of those with a few different approaches. Then the cost would vary, right? Now third party data typically the way it works. For the most part, when it comes to programmatic, is it's based on a CPM markup, right? Typically, we see it's around 15%, 20%, right? So if you have like a $5 CPM that you're paying in programmatic, by leveraging a data segment which is from a third party data provider, you might end up paying $6 in terms of CPM, right? The third party data cost is getting included in that CPM, right? Which is a very different model from how you leverage second party data, right? So that's how I would think about it. And it's difficult to put like a direct number of cost of A versus B, because they are very different tactics overall.
Yeah, and I will also like to add to that the time or the roadmap that you'll have depends on your current maturity. So, what amount of what is your current setup? What type of data are you gathering? Are you gathering the right data? Do you have the right infrastructure, the people in place to be able to effectively start utilizing the first party data? So those are a few other aspects which will add up to the total cost. But yeah, so just wanted to add that point.
Perfect. Okay, so another question that we have, what are some of the recommended platforms for personalization?
Yeah, so when it comes to personalization, you have these two categories of platforms, right? So the different testing platforms that you use for A/B testing, the likes of Optimizely, Adobe Target, Google Optimizer, right? And a lot of those can be leveraged for personalization as well, right? And that's where you do like a lot of these rules-based personalization. If someone has taken this action, you show them this experience, right? And then you have some of these large scale platforms, personalization engines, which focus on omni-channel personalization, not just your website, right? So it personalizes all different interactions, all different touch points, right? And this platforms like Pega, right? Like some of the large scale players use these large decision engines for personalization, right? So these are these two different categories of personalization platforms.
Shobik, do you have anything to add to that?
No, Heather.
Okay. All right. So, a question from Deb. She says, to acquire new customers for a bank, so getting a little industry specific here, how can we segment the website traffic based on profitability for better personalization?
Yeah, well, that's a good question, right? So now, when users are coming to your website, for instance, right, they're interacting with your website, right? So there might be certain calculators on your website, and in the calculator, maybe they're putting in their loan amount, their home value, right? For credit cards, we saw, product finder tool wherein users, including like, what sort of, credit card they're looking for, what is the current, credit range, right? So people are engaging with your website and using these different tools, different widgets, and there could be a lot of insights that can be leveraged for them. So even though they're not your current customers, right? Even though they haven't filled out any form and provided their information to you, right? Still based on a lot of these interactions, you can understand what is the potential need, what is the potential value, right? And you can leverage this information for downstream marketing, right? If these some of these segments have put in like a higher loan amount, or have mentioned that they have better credit scores, right? They would be your high priority segments, high value segments, right? They've also stated about what their underlying need is, and that can be leveraged for personalization. So again, it's how they interact with your website. So you also need to think about like what sort of experience that you provide to the users on the website when they're arriving from different campaigns, to where they're able to provide that information, and you're able to capture that information, which can be used for downstream marketing, right? Does that make sense?
That was good background. Okay, so let's see. We got another question from John. Do you have a view on the minimum amount of first-party data that publishers would require in order to make retargeting effective?
I'm not sure I understand. Can you repeat the question, Heather?
Do you have a view on what is the minimum amount of first-party data that publishers would require in order to make retargeting effective? So basically building up that pool, that audience pool, right?
I mean, like the retargeting is going to be like based on the users that come to your website. So I mean, you would need at least a few thousand, uh, but yeah, you're restricted by that, right? So I don't know if I completely follow the question though.
I think
Shopping.
that's what they're looking for, is a few thousand, because I know that was the minimum a while back, was like 1,000, kind of at that threshold of Google.
Yeah.
And so, it's not always about quality, but there does tend to be that minimum threshold before the campaigns will start triggering, right?
Yeah.
Exactly, because you will also have to check what is the match rate of your first party data with the publisher's audience, because that is going to be a big part of how effective your campaign is going to be. So I mean, to start with a few thousand is what should be an ideal number of first party data points.
Perfect. Okay, so can you provide an example of how we can leverage AI or ML, machine learning, for audience creation?
Shabik, you want to take that?
Sure. So AI ML can be used for or in multiple scenarios. So depending on the type of data that the first party data you have access to. For example, say the example that Vishal provided earlier, when you have data about the user web behavior, say in a GA4, which you can export to a BigQuery platform, you can use AI ML on that data. So look at things like what is the session duration, what are the type of content they're consuming, how frequently do they come to the site. So use attributes like this to come to understand who are the type of people who generally convert, who are the type of people who are not your best customers. So those can be some attributes or some scenarios where you can use AIML for web data. Similarly, when you have first party data, you can similarly use different AIML techniques like segmentation, clustering, to find out who are the groups of audiences, or what are the demographics or psychographics of the audiences in your data set, to come up with these segments who are most profitable to you, or the people whom you don't want to target. So these are the different ways in which you can use AIML. So the whole thing, the main part is what is the first party data they have access to. That will determine what technique you'll be using.
Great. All right. So we got about 7 more minutes. So if there's any more questions, please get them in. So we got a time for just a couple more. So we have one from Peggy, and this was a good one. You mentioned doing a first party data audit. So what are the steps that she would need to take to do the audit? She says that we can't hire an outside source. They use Salesforce, but she's not really sure where to start.
Yeah, so we mentioned there are three main areas of first party data, right? So one is around building a data and martech infrastructure. Then you have the channel tactics, and then you have the measurement and attribution, right? So across, you need to look at these three areas and see how you're performing, right? So when it comes to data and martech infrastructure, you will have to think about like, are you collecting data from all the different sources that you can? Are you leveraging all the potential attributes that you can? is the data clean? Are you able to build a single view of the customer from all of those data sources? Are you able to connect the data, online data, offline data, right? Is there a feedback system in place, right? So are you using the right sort of platforms and infrastructure to enable a lot of this use of first party data, right? So a lot of those things come in the foundational side of audit, right? Then you look at the different tactics, right? And that tactic you can actually benchmark where you stand against some of the tactics that we talked about, right? So you can look at, like, are you doing segmentation, right, of your existing customers for cross sell, for lookalike modeling? Are you establishing second party partnerships? Are you further leveraging, building on first party data, right? So a lot of those tactics that you can do, right? And then the third bit is going to be around measurement and attribution, right? And it's not just going to be attribution models. You will have to have, like, incrementality testing in the post cookieless world. So again, the webinar that Shobik had done earlier, which talks in detail about how to go about measurement attribution, so you can reference that to figure out, like, where you stand compared to a lot of those tactics, right? So those are the different things you need to look at when you're doing the first party data audit yourself. I mean, if you need some high level guidance, you can reach out to us. The email will be provided, and we'll be happy to provide some high level guidance.
I was like stuck on mute there for a second. Sorry, guys. Okay. Well, I think that's probably about all that we have time for. There's a few questions that we didn't get to, and I know that Gopal had a really long question, so we will let you all read that kind of offline and maybe reply, separately. So with that being said, Vishal, Shabik, thanks for being here with us today. Do you want to tell everybody, one last time where to find you and iQuanti?
Yes, so we'll be providing the emails, right, as a follow-up, to this. So you can reach out to us, over there. Feel free to connect with us, on LinkedIn, and yeah, we'll share the link, to the self-assessment as well, which will be part of the deck as well. So yeah, I would encourage you to fill out, that self-assessment, and based on that, we can provide some, high-level, recommendations, to you.
Perfect. All right. Well, Vishal, Shabik, thank you both for being here with us today. I think our attendees enjoyed the presentation. We'll share it with everybody later this afternoon or this evening, depending where you are. And we'll see you next time. Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.